Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tate,
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
educator, historian Dr. Alan Singer, Media Watch expert regular. This is being brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions. We're doing it on a Wednesday before our normal Monday airing on MNN, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and we're using Zoom's technology. Today's date is April 9th, and we're going to try to put some perspective into all the craziness that continues to happen in our country, emanating strictly primarily from the orange originator in DC and or Mar-a-Lago, wherever he happens to be. But the two things I think we need to put in perspective, and we will try. One is the fact that our foreign policy has been torpedoed. I think what's been our foreign policy and our allies for the last 80 plus years by these guys' recent actions, which when he came down the escalator back in the days and started saying stuff, we were not shy about saying he lied, and we were not shy about saying he was a Russian asset. Correct, Bob?
Yeah, that's exactly what we said.
So
That day, that afternoon, yeah.
pretty close to as soon
Yeah.
as he opened his mouth. And we haven't changed over the years, and everything he's done seems to point to that. And so we're going to talk about just how much he's in Putin's lap, or is Putin's lapdog, or is a Russian asset, and try to put it in perspective. And then segue from that to the fact that because he's such a fan of Putin and seems to want to emulate Putin, Xi Jinping, the guy in North Korea, whose name I've
Kim Jong-un.
Jong-un. uh,
Yeah.
He's basically put us on the verge of no longer being an attempted democracy, because we never were a democracy, but at least we made attempts at being a democracy, and that's seriously in danger. And then, of course, we'll try to keep tabs, report card style, on what else is going on crazy in the world that we should be paying attention to. But Alan, because you're the historian educator amongst us, tell us a little bit about one, that slide from cooperative alliances with our friends in Europe and elsewhere in the globe to the fact that one of the senators in the chamber actually raised a significant question, which we might try to roll into this show, about whether Donald Trump is a Russian asset or not. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, after World War II, now remember, we'll talk about a war where between 50 and 100 million people died. After World War II, the United States was instrumental in setting up a series of military alliances which were designed, or at least intended, to prevent a war, a second war, especially a war that involving nuclear weapons, but also a series of economic proposals that would balance out the rules for how trade took place, how money got transferred around the world. Now, the United States was a dominant economic and military power at the time, and really those rules benefited the United States. But since the 1950s, we're talking about like 75 years now, they pretty much have worked. They haven't worked well for everybody, but they pretty much have worked. Now, in the 1950s, because Europe and its industry had been destroyed, the United States was in a unique position. So not only was it exporting goods, it was rebuilding Europe. The reality is that today, the United States is not in that unique position anymore. Europe developed, Asia developed, and as a result, the United States is one amongst many. It's still a dominant economic and military power, but it's not the only one. Donald Trump has now begun to dismantle both the treaties and the economic system, and it virtually puts the whole system on the verge of an economic collapse. And that's what people have been looking at. And
Let's dig into that bit about the treaties per se.
okay,
So, Bob, remember that whole bit when in his first term when he's talking about getting out of NATO and he didn't like the way NATO was being run and they weren't putting their money. Tell me, this thing about the European Union all coming together and saying they want Ukraine to become a member of NATO. Donald Trump and his new Secretary of State pretty much have totally torpedoed that, haven't they?
They've basically made that seem like having Ukraine in NATO would upset the world balance and create a danger in Europe, which is exactly the opposite of reality. Rubio, yeah, Trump, they've done their best to try to get Ukraine to forget about that. And, of course, this only makes one guy happy, and his name is Vladimir Putin, because that would allow him to exercise his, well, basically to roll over Ukraine without that threat in the background, and maybe another, nearby additional territory.
Raymond,
Yeah.
remember Jeff Merkley's thing?
Yeah.
What's a little background on Jeff Merkley, and I'll try to find that video. But two of Trump's nominees were being put up before the Senate.
That's right. No, he was questioning the nominee for Deputy Secretary of State, whose name was Christopher Landau. And he put it to him point blank, is Trump a Russian asset? And then he started to list some of his recent actions, which play right into Russia's favor.
The whole bit was with he started out with the whole Ukraine travesty.
Yeah,
Right?
well, yeah, and when Trump was negotiating with Zelensky, he was trying to get him to give up concessions that would only benefit Russia
That's
and
fine.
not the Ukraine.
But keep giving us some background. Let me see if I can find that video.
And of course, we're talking about Jeff Merkley, the
Senator Merkley,
the junior
Senator,
senator
Democrat,
from
Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to look for that while you guys give folks a little background on Senator Merkley and why he's been grilling these Trump appointees quite seriously for a while.
Well, he says his constituency has been asking him these questions. Is it possible that Trump is, working for Russia? And there's an interesting book that's out. It's interesting. I don't know how truthful it is, but it's by what's his name? A journalist named Craig Unger, and the book is called American Compromat. And he uses his source of information is an ex-KGB agent by the name of Yuri Shvets, I believe it's pronounced. It's Shvets. And that says that Trump has been recruited by the KGB since 1987 when he visited. But he's apparently, the book also says that he's apparently been on the Russian radar since his first wedding when he married what was her name?
Marla Maples?
Ivana
No.
Zelnikova
Okay.
was a Czech model.
Okay.
And that's when he first hit the Russian radar. Now, he visited Russia in like 1987, I think, and he became very friendly. KGB, apparently, according to the book, courted him, found out. Oh, and there's a very interesting quote. He said that they found that he was, for the KGB, it was a charm offensive. They had collected a lot of information on his personality, so they knew who he was personally. The feeling was that he was extremely vulnerable intellectually and psychologically, and he was prone to flattery. No, that sounds like sounds like the guy that's been our president for.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent description. Yeah.
So Zoom won't let me share the screen without quitting to share the screen, so it doesn't look like I can
Okay.
put up Jeff Merkley.
But I think we got the gist of what Ray was trying to say. Yeah. I remember and when Trump still had the casinos and the other properties that he was working even back then to get some business deals in Russia. So, I mean, there's a connection there.
The funny
Uh,
thing is that he was bankrupt before he went to Russia, and then all of a sudden he comes back from Russia, and within a couple of years he's back on top again.
I used to tell my friends that there was a moment in history where everybody, I was talking to a group of friends, I said, every one of you were worth more than Trump was at that time. He was so deep in debt. Everybody in that room was in better financial shape than Trump was, but look at him now and still shoveling in money from uh, conflicts of interest. But don't have time to get into those today.
The Russian
And
oligarchs. Remember the
it's
condos in Florida,
chocolate.
remember the condos in Lower Manhattan are all bought up by Russian oligarchs. I remember those days. We talked a little bit about it when we were talking about follow the money on some Media Watch stuff, the banker connections in Cyprus and the oligarchs in Florida. My memory says we were trying to follow that money trail on this guy and how he was basically rolling over properties thanks to Russian oligarch dollars. And you're right, Bob. That's how he got back on his feet. And who knows? Maybe they have more stuff on him than we know about than just that little above the tip of the iceberg stuff, which is why Jeff Merkley was asking, is this man a Russian asset? Because the stuff that he did to torpedo Ukraine, stop the weapon shipments, the entire litany. The reason I wanted to play Jeff Merkley is because he ticked that off so beautifully, so quickly, and so succinctly. The man could not answer. He could not. He was flabbergasted sitting in that chair. But basically, the fact that this guy loves Putin so much that he would bend over backwards to torpedo a functioning democratic country that was trying its best to push back an invasion that was launched by Putin. And Trump actually spouted Putin's lie that Ukraine started the war. That was one of the things that really upset Jeff Merkley, and I can see why. Our Russian president is our American president, so-called president, because he ain't a president. He's just a mafia thug who a bunch of misguided people put into the White House. But you can be in the White House and not be a president. As far as I'm concerned, he's in the White House, cannot function like a president. So, but anyway, that was an editorial. To get back to the thing at hand, he loves those people so much, he's adopted their playbook. And Alan, I want us to get into this whole slide into autocracy. That's all these executive orders, all this flouting. We did the last show about the probable illegality of most of those executive orders. And basically, it's a thumb in the face of any democratic principles. It's an assault on the Constitution. And it's all about making the unitary presidency and the guy who wants to be king a king. And so tell us a little bit about the parallels that we're looking at right now, watching the Republicans in the Congress who should be pushing back, letting this man become a nascent 1930s Hitler dictator in the making.
Well, one of the things that I think is worth commenting on is just the idea of all the lies that he spouts, and that it changes his position and he just says, well, I didn't. The idea of the big lie actually is coined by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf in the 1920s. And Hitler's point, and this is a quote, the great masses of the people, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, will more easily fall victim to a big lie than a small lie. And that's because when a falsehood is repeated and treated as if it is a self-evident truth, people eventually take for granted that it may actually be true and they stop questioning it. That is the technique that the Trump White House has adopted. They just issue statements that have no basis in reality. What they just this week, they attacked University of Northwestern University. I think it's around Chicago. And what they claimed was that it was promoting anti-Semitism. And the evidence was that the clinic at its law school had defended students who had been brought up on charges because of protest demonstrations about the war against Gaza. Now, that's what law school's supposed to do. You provide a clinic where students can learn and they get involved with cases. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. He's withdrawing their funds because he's accusing them of anti-Semitism. The other crazy one is they are taking away the climate funding for research from Princeton University, claiming that its exaggerations have caused climate anxiety. I mean, the entire world recognizes the veracity of these findings, that climate has changed and it's a danger. Trump administration is defunding the research.
I know, and exactly what you say about the big lie. I mean, just take the students who are being arrested and attempted to be deported. Khalil is a member of Hamas, Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student. They just came out and said it. They've provided no evidence to that effect.
That's a lie. They claim he's a member of Hamas.
Yeah, they simply said it, no proof, a lie, big lie, because it's a rather heavy duty one. With the detainee in El Salvador right now, the one that they sent down by mistake. They admit that it was a mistake, and they're saying, well, he's in a foreign country. We can't do anything about it. Big lie. Yes, you can. You're the ones who sent them there. You're the ones who contracted with the prison to hold them. You can do it. So, but the paperwork that they handed the judge said, oh, no, we're tied of our hands. Big lie. But a lot of the country simply believes it. Like you said, Alan, I had to write it down. In the primitive simplicity of their minds, people just accept big lies.
Yeah. You know, the other one is on the people who are accused of being Venezuelan gang members. They provided no evidence. They just called them gang members. There was no evidence. A judge in Texas has just issued an injunction saying to the federal government, well, people are entitled to due process. It actually says that in the Constitution. Persons are entitled to due process. You have to give these people a hearing. They've refused.
Yes.
So one of the key things that differentiates democracies from autocracies is basically just that, the right to due process, which means they can't just scoop you up like a Gestapo or brown shirts or whatever and throw you into a dungeon without you having recourse to legal representation to defend whatever bogus charges they may have. But what I'm seeing, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, every time they scoop up somebody, like Khalil, they scoop them up off of his campus or Columbia apartment, they immediately whisk them somewhere to Jersey and from there to Louisiana. Now, Louisiana has absolutely nothing to do with this man's profession, where he teaches, where he lives, where he works, and whatever claim that they have against him has no grounding in Louisiana. They didn't arrest him in Louisiana. He shouldn't be incarcerated there. But because, and guess what? This is another thing we need to remember. They were not in any uniform. They were not showing any badges. They were in civilian clothes. Some of them, I believe, had masks on, correct?
Yes.
Went after him. And so what you're looking at is another Gestapo tactics of secret police. And let's just say we'll call them secret police because masks, civilian clothing, no uniforms. So they're operating in, quote, secret. And I believe that they're operating in secret because they knew what they were doing was illegal and against the law when you deny someone due process. So that's one of the key marks of an autocracy. So, Alan, back in Germany. When they went after the gypsies and the Nazis and anybody that wasn't white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, Aryan, super race looking, those are the tactics they used.
Yes. Eric, this is the thing. Those tactics actually have a long history in the United States. During slavery days, you had kidnapping clubs, which would comb the North looking for people they accused of being runaway slaves. And
Blackbirders,
they
what they
would
were
pick up
called,
free people.
blackbirders.
Yeah, they would pick up free blacks and ship them out of the jurisdiction before they could mount a defense. That's why this was written into the 14th Amendment, so it could never happen again. And it's happening again. And it's happening again.
Just that kind of action and the tactics speaks to the lack of respect for the law.
Mm.
What are some of the other hallmarks of this slide into autocracy that we are watching before our eyes that needs to be pushed back on? There should be
Well, we were talking about the attacks on journalism, just on just the attacks on being able to report fairly.
dig into that some more.
Well, today a judge ruled, Alan just pointed out before we went on air, that a federal judge, just sent out a ruling that the Associated Press can't be barred from press conferences in the White House. You can't bar the Associated Press simply because you don't agree with their reporting. That's part of the press freedom that's in the Constitution. But the judge has given a few days for the Trump administration to respond. But Trump has filled the Washington press corps with supporting agencies, far-right agencies, and that's an autocratic move, limiting the freedom of the press, limiting who the people can hear from, who can toss questions to the president. If you had heard some of the lame questions tossed in some of these press conferences from these right-wing operations, you'd have to, myself as a long-term journalist, I had to laugh because they were so bad. So yeah, press freedom is one of the hallmarks of a lack of press freedom and autocracy.
Who was the report? What organization? Reporters Without Borders or?
Oh, yes. I was at an event which highlighted the Reporters Without Borders, and I'll just
we
mention
are
quick.
in this country as far as freedom of the press. Just
Yes.
so our viewers understand how far come down we've had.
Yes, I mean, I can, maybe I'll try to bring up the map, maybe not. But anyway, they have a score sheet on press freedom, a global score sheet on press freedoms globally. And right now, at the top of the list, I believe, was Norway, #1 in press freedom in the world. You have to scroll down to number 55 to reach the United States. Above us are countries like from the old Soviet bloc, Slovenia, Armenia, the Dominican Republic is way above us actually, and they score based on what they've seen in press freedom, and that's where we are. We're way down in their top 100 press freedoms globally. And of course, that was never the case. And not to my surprise, Canada actually is rated pretty high. And that the owners of the piece of land we're trying to steal, Denmark, we're trying to steal Greenland from them, they're #2. They're really high on press freedom. So I don't, So anyway, we've slipped badly in that regard. And just check the time, we're about 3.5 minutes left.
Interestingly enough, Ray, I don't remember whether you were digging into that whole bit about our NATO alliance and how long it had been in, like Alan was saying, 75 years or more. But that was the linchpin, was it not, of keeping Europe stabilized and pushing back against the Soviet bloc when Joe Stalin and those folks were in power?
Well, yeah, it was indeed. But now, talk about Trump possibly being courted by the Soviets, one of his main things when he came back from the Soviet Union, he was talking about, why NATO? Why are we contributing to countries that can afford to defend themselves? But that was never the point. The point was an alliance, a protective alliance to defend democracy in Europe and elsewhere. So,
And what's the key concept, Ray? You touch one, you touch us all. You attack one.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
that was the point. Had very little, that
So in the little time we have left, I'm going to try to quote from a CBC report that I saw earlier when I was looking for background on this. And U.S. could lose democracy status, says global watchdog. Lose democracy status. Even though we're not a full democracy, at least we make attempts at it. But that attempt has been sorely compromised. And this is a quote from the article. They're quoting a gentleman named Stefan Lindberg, who heads the Office of Varieties of Democracy Project, which is run by Sweden's University of Gothenburg. And the quote is, if it continues like this, the United States will not score as a democracy when we release next year's data. And basically what they're saying is we are now listed as a liberal democracy, but on the scale of things, you have liberal democracy, electoral democracy, gray zone, which might be between liberal democracy, electoral democracy, and electoral autocracy. Electoral autocracy and then closed autocracy. They expect that the United States will probably fall into an electoral autocracy by this time next year, based on the way Donald Trump is going and the orders he's issued. Now, that's not me making this up. That's the watchdog agency that's headquartered in Gothenburg University in Switzerland. No, it wasn't Sweden, yes. And basically, all these illegal anti-constitutional orders and all these actions of sweeping people up in the dead of night, whisking them off under secret police tactics and technique means we're watching this country slide from an attempted democracy into an autocracy quicker than we can blink.
And with that, we're about out.
This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
I'm a very worried Alan Singer.
And I'm a very worried Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And we'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.